Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I thank the witnesses for their testimony today and their willingness to step up and serve again in each case. This committee is the chief oversight committee for the Congress. And in our Constitution, the legislative branch has a fundamental responsibility to provide oversight. Probably the primary purpose of this committee is oversight over the executive branch. To do that well, we've got to have the agencies provide us the information we need to do effective oversight. Mr. Meyer, during our phone call yesterday, we talked a lot about that. We discussed my concern that in your prior role at DHS, you made congressional oversight of DHS difficult. Former chairman of PSI, who many of you knew, Senator Carl Levin, complained about that. He said specifically in his report that DHS initially withheld documents and repeatedly resisted the committee requests, which unnecessarily prolonged the committee investigation. That's pretty strong words. I've never seen that in any other PSI report that I did as chairman of that committee or others have done. And I ask unanimous consent to enter those relevant pages of the report into the record, Mr. Chairman. So the question is, how can Senator Peters and me, and how can Senator Ossoff and Senator Johnson be assured that we won't get that kind of treatment should you be confirmed in this new important role at DHS as General Counsel?
Thank you, Senator, for giving me an opportunity to respond to that. I enjoyed our conversation yesterday, and I appreciate the opportunity to address this publicly. First of all, I would like to respectfully disagree with one of your comments, which is that what I did when I was at DHS in the past was make oversight more difficult. You are referring to
I was quoting Senator Levin on that, the Democrat from Michigan who was chair of PSI at the time.
I do not recall Senator Levin ever saying anything specifically about me, but if I may, as I recall, the investigation you're speaking about and the report you're speaking about occurred in 2011, 2012. I arrived in 2011. That was the very beginning of my time at DHS. And I would absolutely agree with you that that particular investigation involving fusion centers was very difficult and was not the department's best moment in responding to oversight. But I would like to point out that by the time I left DHS in 2016 and had been running oversight response for 5 years, we had improved our responsiveness by 120%. We had reduced our response time by 60%, at the same time that the volume of incoming requests had doubled. There's no question that there was a process involved there. As I recall, I believe you mentioned yesterday that one of the issues that the subcommittee had concerns with was the fact that DHS was unable to produce emails for technological reasons, but yet the National Archives subsequently was able to do so. And honestly, my response to that, unfortunately, was not surprise. I don't recall it, but I'm not surprised, because what I do recall is huge technological challenges that we had at DHS in oversight response. And that was a large part of what I addressed, and if I am confirmed, would focus on addressing again. I said in my opening statement that I would make congressional oversight my highest priority if I were confirmed. I am a big believer in congressional oversight. As you know, I've spent time both on the Hill and at DHS and in the executive branch. I actually spent more time conducting oversight in the Senate than I have at DHS. I, like you, was frustrated on the Hill as well as at DHS. I appreciated that
commitment in your testimony this morning, and I heard it. I also entered the record, because you mentioned that I wasn't going to, the back and forth, the letters regarding the PSI requests for emails for a specific DHS official. PSI was told, and again, you were the one that had the lead on this, that those emails were not available, and later we found out that they were. And so I'll just enter that into the record since you mentioned it. I, again, appreciate your general commitment to being more responsive to Congress. Let me ask you some specific questions. If confirmed, do you commit to responding in a timely manner to requests from the committee? Just yes or no?
Absolutely, sir.
If confirmed, do you commit providing all documents requested by this committee without redaction unless it is agreed to beforehand? Yes or no?
I will make every effort to do so, Senator. Obviously, I, even as General Counsel, do not have control over that.
Well,
but
you would
what
have,
I have control
you would have the
over,
most
I will.
control over it, as I understand it. What would you redact? what would you feel you had the right to redact unless you had, again, worked something out with us in advance? And I think there are situations like that.
I believe the executive branch traditionally will redact information, for example, that is subject to executive privilege.
Yeah, just so you know, this committee does not recognize any assertions of that sort or national security because, you know, we are the Oversight Committee, unless, again, we have the opportunity to discuss that in advance. So
Well, Senator, let me be clear. I would absolutely discuss it in advance. The Constitution requires us, and the courts have made it clear, that the oversight process must be an accommodation process. So I'm sorry if I misunderstood or misspoke. I would welcome every opportunity to communicate with you, with your staff, and anybody else on the Hill about these issues. Oversight is about communication and accommodation.
if confirmed, do you agree to provide any fact witnesses requested by this committee to be interviewed?
Yes, sir.
How about the IG's office? DHS Office Inspector General also has concerns, as you know, sometimes about not being able to get information. Would you provide witnesses or documents requested by the IG?
Absolutely. I think OIG oversight is quite important.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. So, Mr. Tien, your distinguished military service is extraordinary, and the leadership you demonstrated in uniform has been talked about today. Could you also talk about how your private sector background qualifies you to be the next Deputy Secretary, in particular, how you think the private sector could be brought in as a partner more effectively?
Ranking Member Portman, thank you very much for that question, and I appreciate your acknowledgement of my military service. And by acknowledging my military service, you're really acknowledging the military service of all the great Americans who have come before me or are currently serving, so thank you, sir. In terms of my private sector experience, I look at, and there are many different ways that the Department of Homeland Security is already, can, and should be partnering with the private sector. In particular, I think about the most recent, and this is just an example, obviously, of the most recent example around the cyber attack on the Colonial Pipeline. The Colonial Pipeline organization did not have to acknowledge or report to CISA that they had undergone a ransomware attack. Now, I understand, just being as a private citizen today, that President Biden says in the future will require that. It is this kind of partnership that I believe that the private sector must have with the public sector, must have with the federal government, in particular DHS, obviously, in reverse, for the public sector, for the federal government, and for CISA, in particular at DHS, to have, as it's a two-way street in terms of that communication. The private sector serves, we know this, they have constituents too. They're called customers, they're called clients. And at least in the United States of America, those clients, those constituents, and those customers are the same constituents for us. And so in the service of the American people, in particular in the protection of all of the critical infrastructure, not just the pipeline, but all of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, I believe that the private sector can and should, and the public sector can and should be strong partners.
Thank you, Mr. Tien.